From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to a new episode of the Sox Machine Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, as we bring you a new episode as we record late on Wednesday, February 8th, 2023. In this podcast episode, we mentioned it when we talked about the Vegas over-under and getting those win totals, as the White Sox were, in some books, 83.5 wins for the 2023 season. There were one Caesars ahead of them at 84.5, and some are being brave and putting the White Sox win total at 85.5 wins. And we just recently talked about that in one of the latest podcast episodes for the Sox Machine Podcast. But now we have the 2023 Zips projections, and we're going to be talking about those in this particular episode. And joining me is the managing editor of SoxMachine.com. It's Jim Margulis. And Jim, this is what I want to do before we get into the Zips projections, because by the time everybody either listens to this episode or watches this episode, they're firmly aware of what the Zips projections are. Mm-hmm. So what I like to do is let's get a vibe check. We're a week away from pitchers and catchers reporting to spring training. How are you actually feeling about this upcoming 2023 season?
I think I'm more or less at peace with the White Sox kind of running a ramshackle roster into the regular season. I think it's, the Central's weak, as we see at the standings. The Guardians are barely a winning team, and that's considered a postseason team for the AL Central. So nobody has the right in the division to look really, or feel really confident about the way things are going. So it's more or less like, I would add more to the White Sox. I would consider like an Elvis Andrus or something like that to try to bolster the lineup in the middle of the infield depth charts. And, we'll see what happens with Mike Clevenger, but that's another case where like the White Sox could use somebody to help shore up the back end of the rotation, just in case like Lance Lynn has recurrence with his knee injury or something like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of risk here, but I'm also like, well, if the White Sox don't want to do anything about it, it's their team. I'm not in the front office. Like, I'm not trying to drum up ticket sales or anything like that. Like, that's not my job. So that's on them. I wish they were more exciting, and it certainly makes our job easier and our traffic easier and our revenue up when the White Sox are good. But, hey, that's where I'm at.
Is it pathetic to say I'm already over this season? Like, the season hasn't even started. And there's a part of me that's like, I am over 2023. Like, if we just want to click skip on this season and just sim it, and tell me later and how the White Sox finish and go directly into 2024, I would be okay with that. Like, there's a part of me that would be okay with that.
Yeah.
There's also a part of me, though, that I want to be excited for this season just to see this core and what I really do think is their last chance to play together.
Mm-hmm.
If they can bounce back. Because if all of them can stay healthy, and all of them play to the potential that we've seen, like in 2020 and 2021, it could be a special season for the White Sox.
Mm-hmm.
Those are huge what-ifs, though. And I at this moment, Jim, I just feel torn. There's a part of me that wants to still be excited about this upcoming season and is curious on how it's going to play out. There's another part of me that's like, I'm done. Like, I'm over this season. Tell me how many games Mike Clevenger is going to be suspended for. Just let me know who's getting hurt, when they're getting hurt, who gets traded in July. Like, I'm really conflicted right now as we're a week away before spring training starts.
Yeah, tell me when the backbreaking injury is kind of like the, what I'm bracing for. But no, I mean, I'm looking forward to it in the sense that, I like baseball and I like putting our, that's, I guess, the fun thing about writing and recording and such is just that you put your thoughts down, you put your best guesses down, you air out your grievances, you you check your vibes and everybody else's vibes and so forth. And then the games happen, and then you measure up to see how well you did or whether you're accurate. You hope you're wrong in a positive way that everybody benefits from. Certainly we would like to be, especially the more pessimistic among us would enjoy being wrong. Like, it's not a case where like, all right, they went 77 and 85. All right, I get nothing from that aside from bragging rights and less revenue because they weren't interesting. So that's kind of like, there's no benefit for the White Sox being bad aside from like, well, like we look smarter, but that doesn't necessarily mean bigger, better things for us when the interest isn't there. So that's why I look forward to it, is because like, I think if I weren't interested by the exercise of putting our thoughts down or recording our thoughts and then seeing how they measure up to the actual games, like then we would have stopped doing this a while ago because the time isn't worth it. But that's very edifying either way. Like, even when you're wrong, it's interesting to be wrong. I wish we were wronger more about just, how things were going. Like, not that we're always right, but we're just, I would love to be like way off in terms of how negative we've been, the last couple of years, and the whole Tony La Russa thing, that experience. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it, is like, nuts. I welcome spring training. I welcome the regular season. Like, it's better than just sitting here dreading, poking at the same holes over and over again. So yeah, it's small solace probably, but it works for me at least.
I think the 2023 season as a whole for Major League Baseball could be a really exciting season. You have some really good teams in Major League Baseball that could make the entire regular season race, especially in the National League East and the National League West and the American League East. And who knows, maybe Seattle, Texas, and the Los Angeles Angels, maybe they surprise us and they make the Houston Astros sweat in the American League West. Like, we could see some really good races this year. And there's, again, some really good teams that have been built for this season. I just wish the White Sox were more involved in those types of conversations when people have a complete outlook of the upcoming season. They talk about the teams that they're really hyped about. And this is a great segue to the 2023 Zips projection. So one of our best friends of the show, I should say our best friend of the show, because he'd be angry if I just said one of the best. But our best friend of the show, Dan Zaborski of Fangraphs.com, the keeper of Zips, released the American League 2023 Zips projections for the upcoming season. And brace yourself. If you have not seen or heard what these Zips projections are, you stayed off social media or you couldn't log on to Twitter, it is not pretty for the Chicago White Sox. So for the 2023 Zips projected standings, Zips is looking at the Cleveland Guardians winning the American League Central with the 50th percentile projection of 83 and 79. The Minnesota Twins 50th percentile projection is 80 and 82. The Chicago White Sox 50th percentile projection is 74 and 88. 74 and 88. The Tigers are at 71 and 91, and the Royals are 70 and 92. Jim, I cannot lie. This was a punch in the gut when I saw this number. And when we talked about the Vegas over-under numbers, I had a feeling either Zips or Bakota was going to project the White Sox at like 80 and 82. And I was thinking that would be the worst of the preseason projections. At no moment did I ever think that the 2023 White Sox would be a 74 and 88 win team. And the fact that that's the 50th percentile projection after 1,000 computer simulations from Zips is incredibly disheartening.
Yeah, I'm really surprised by it. Like, I saw that number and I was shocked as well because, especially like the 11% chance to win the division, basically 1 out of 9 simulations, like they're winning the division. And that seemed low to me. Just because when you look at the variance, when you look at like all of the injuries that have sapped, the key contributors to the White Sox roster, Tim Anderson, Eloy Jimenez, Yohan Moncada, Luis Robert, like, you would think some of those simulations would have, all four of those guys playing 140 plus games and doing like 4+ wins worth of damage, and that they would like finish with an 88 win or 90 win total, and just, paired with like the most proven rotation in the division, coming through with, some fairly credible win totals, like, high 80s, even low 90s. I could also see ones where, like, based on these simulations, like where just the White Sox core crumbles, and two pitching injuries is all it takes for the rotation to be in shambles, and they finish with like 70 wins. Like, I can see it widespread. We talked about it before with like Pacoda, how the blob that measures like the most common win outcomes, like I thought it'd be like a wider spread, like a mesa versus like a bell curve, because I can see the number of outcomes being so wide. It surprised me like that. Both the White Sox, median was so low, and also that division was low, because I could just see like them winning the division by 7 games. I can see them crapping the bed. Like, I can see like the range of outcomes dragging the number higher, just because their ceiling seems a bit higher, or considerably higher than that of a 74 win team.
I agree with you on the ceiling. And when I looked through the first half of the season, I'm circling series that I think would be great temperature checks, but the ultimate temperature check to have a really good idea where the White Sox are and how this season's going to play out is Monday, July 24th. And that is an off day. And it's an off day for the Chicago White Sox after the All-Star break, in which they have a 9-game road trip, Jim. 3 games in Atlanta, 3 games in Queens to face the Mets, and then 3 games in Minneapolis against the Minnesota Twins. I think we're going to have a really good understanding of where the 2023 Chicago White Sox are on Monday, July 24th, and that is a week before the trade deadline. If the White Sox are...
If they haven't sold already.
Right, if they haven't sold already. But if the White Sox are like 5 games above 500, they're probably going to buy. If they're at 500, they're probably going to stay. If they're 5 games below 500, and if they get crushed during that road trip, they're probably going to sell. Like, Lance Lynn could be offloaded if he's healthy. Lucas Giolito, Yasmani Grandal, Kendall Graveman, Joe Kelly. Like, teams are going to be calling Rick Hahn and blowing up his phone a week before the trade deadline. And all of a sudden you can have a team that's 5 games below 500. And then, that's how I could see the 74 and 88 Zips projection becoming reality. In that the White Sox, more times than not, if you sim the 2023 season 1,000 times, they end up selling at the trade deadline because they can't stay healthy, or guys are not picking up their production levels, or there's just not enough help for the core because the White Sox lack the depth. And Dan Zaborski wrote about that in the Post, that Zips likes the Tigers and Royals 27 through 52 players compared to the White Sox. Like, Zips despises the depth that the Chicago White Sox have behind the 26-man roster, and that's also incredibly disheartening. So that's how I could see 74 and 88 being realistic, is that July just crushes them. Because before the trade deadline, or I should say before the All-Star break, they got a home stand against the Toronto Blue Jays, who look really strong no matter what projection system, a playoff contender, and the St. Louis Cardinals. Like, thanks to the All-Star break, they get a break, but it goes Blue Jays, Cardinals, Braves, Mets. Like, we're going to have a really good understanding where the Chicago White Sox are in July. And maybe that's just how the bottom falls out. Or if they're overachieving, maybe that's how they crush their Zips projections. But that's really the only realistic way in my head, and I guess my heart. Maybe I'm speaking more from my heart here, Jim, that the White Sox finish 74 and 88 is that they really struggle in the first half of the season, and then Rick Hahn pulls the plug and they sell at the trade deadline.
Yeah, either that, or, perhaps we underestimated just the effect of the more balanced schedule and facing every contender rather than contenders from 4 divisions and missing 2 from the National League. Like, we talked about that before in the last show, trying to figure out, like, how we'd like to see a set of projections with the old schedule, where like, maybe the White Sox play the only division the previous schedule said they were planned to play in 2023, to get an idea of just how much that affects it. And maybe I'll shoot Dan a message to say like, hey, here's an article idea for you, just in case this is possible for you to do this. Just because like, yeah, that's maybe that's part of the shock. And maybe that's why like Cleveland is projected to win the Central with 83 wins versus like 85, 86, because it's taken a bite out of them. And the Twins being under 500 when like if there were 6 more games against the Tigers, 6 more games against the Royals, even for the White Sox, 6 more games against the Twins, who are not world beaters, like that might raise them to like the previously pessimistic projections we saw, like 79, 80 wins, that we thought would be the way that would be kind of really disappointing. So that's maybe my guess in terms of just like why 74 jumps out, is like, oh, that's, when you mention they have the Cardinals and they have the Mets and they have the Dodgers and they have like, at various points of the season, they have all these teams. Like, yeah, I guess, if it catches them at the wrong time, and like, say it's the, July, Lance Lynn is down, Dylan Cease, God forbid, is down. Then they have to go through that, row of teams, Blue Jays, Cardinals. Who else did you mention? Mets, Braves, Twins.
Yes.
Is that the gauntlet you're talking about there? Yeah, I can see it being a case where like, oh, that's all of a sudden you're talking about like losing 5 series in a row. That'd be like a disastrous scenario, and also like unlikely just because of the way major league teams shake out when it comes to wins and losses. But still, like that's kind of what we're talking about here in terms of just a wider array of contenders on the roster or on the schedule than there used to be. And perhaps this is the way it manifests itself. I will try to spin it positively, or at least like say like one thing Zips can't capture is just, and if the White Sox, make a mockery of the 74 win projection, even if they like don't blow it away, just talking about 85 wins and things go wrong and they still win 85 games because there's more talent than emerged. Like, it's going to say like, boy, Zips really couldn't capture what Tony La Russa took off the table. And then it's going to be like, wow, the White Sox really wasted 2 years of Tony La Russa. Like it's going to be a while before the White Sox can really escape the damage of that era, as much as everybody would like to put it behind them and pretend it would never happen. And, Rick Hahn will probably treat him as is the person who shall not be named. But really it's, those 2 years are crucial to this whole thing working. And should, they just fall flat or even just come up short, and you're talking about like having to rebuild. First of all, why would Rick Hahn, why should Rick Hahn ever be in charge of doing it? Why should Kenny Williams ever be in charge of doing it? That's why this year is so bleak, is because like there isn't the prospect of a tear down solving everything, because we tried that. Like we all went through that. We gave them the benefit of the doubt. It didn't work. And so you can't do it again. They smashed that glass. They can't piece that back together and say like, this time it'll be different. And that's why I think there's a bleakness here that didn't accompany maybe the 2016 season, because like everybody was kind of begging for that hard reset because, just the accelerated rebuild with the, trade for Jeff Samardzija, and then like the half measures in free agency didn't quite feel right. And then obviously the Adam LaRoche thing happened and it just all blew up, and everybody just wants to say good riddance to the team. But even if like whoever's kid is this year's Drake LaRoche and it all goes down the toilet early, like nobody's going to say blow it up, because nobody's going to say blow it up. They're going to say like, I don't care. That's really the option, is like, go White Sox or I've stopped caring.
Last year, for the 2022 Zips projections, the following teams beat their projections by 10 or more games: the Baltimore Orioles, the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Houston Astros, the Cleveland Guardians, the New York Mets, the New York Yankees, and the Atlanta Braves. Only the Orioles, out of the teams I mentioned, did not reach the postseason, but the Orioles gave it one heck of a run. The Orioles beat their projection by 19 games. The Dodgers beat their projection by 18 games. The Astros by 16. The Guardians by 14 games. The Mets 13 games. And the Yankees and Braves by 11 games. So it is possible. I mean, the Guardians had a projected of 78 and 84, before the 2022 season, and they go 92-70. So maybe the White Sox could pull a 14-game turnaround as far as beating their ZiPS projections. However, this table does not give one confidence. And for those that are listening to the podcast, a table that I created and I've also tweeted out, which you could follow me on Twitter at SoxMachine_Josh, is the ZiPS projected wins from 2015 to the present and the White Sox actual wins. So in 2015, the projected win total was 74. 2016, it was 84. 2017, it was 79 wins. 2018, it was 74. 2019 was 68. 2020, with this shortened schedule, ZiPS projected the White Sox to go 31-29. 2021, 89 wins. 2022, last year, 88 wins. And this year, of course, 74 wins. So out of the past 8 seasons, the White Sox are 4-4. 4 times they have beaten their ZiPS projection. 4 times they have fallen short of their ZiPS projection. When they beat their projection, it is usually between 2 to 4 games they beat their ZiPS projection by. When they fall short of their ZiPS projection, it's either big time underachieving like 2016 where they fell short by 6 games, or, and this is something that Dan Zaborski wrote back in November on Fangraphs, is that it's very difficult when you're doing ZiPS projections in February for the upcoming season, the volatility of how big of a roster shakeup there could be, especially like 2017 and 2018 when the White Sox made some trades and they fell 12 games shy of their projected win total for those seasons because they were in the middle of the rebuild. 2022, there's a lot of excuses, but none of them are good, and the White Sox falling 7 wins short of the projected win total. So if this trend continues, as far as this table, Jim, and if the 50th percentile projection is 74-88, now I'm thinking, well, maybe the range is more like 62 wins to 78 wins, and no matter what, if ZiPS is right, we're looking at a losing season for the White Sox in 2023. And it goes back to the conversation we had to start this show. That's the other half of me right now. That's like, skip 2024.
62 wins. I'm trying to fathom that with this roster. Just like what it would take, and also like just what the reaction would be. Like just, what the stands would look like.
I can't imagine.
Yeah. That seems like, just basically apocalyptic. But the team I'm kind of fascinated by when it comes to the ZiPS projections and how they compare the White Sox and stack up is like the Orioles. Because right now they're 80-82. But when you look at like their depth chart numbers, like there's not a whole lot there. They have like, some probably interesting variants of like guys like Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson and DL Hall and Grayson Rodriguez. Like they have like a whole bunch of guys who are, could be great, could be rookies of the year, could be like co-rookies of the year. Could also have some, guys who have to be sent down to AAA or get hurt. And like when you talked about like beating their projections and like teams that topped it, like it would have to, I think the White Sox would probably feel closest to the Orioles in terms of like unforeseen depth, because like the Guardians, we knew they could play some defense. We knew that they had some elite pitching talent and elite production for like pulling guys out of nowhere. And then Terry Francona, it's really hard for him to have a losing record unless like he misses a lot of the year due to some kind of medical emergency. So you can't really rule them out like when or you can't really be surprised when they beat their projections, because I think they're good and their organization's good and Terry Francona's good at getting a greater sum than the parts would suggest. But like the Orioles, like the way they beat the projections and the way they hung around all year, even though they subtracted at the deadline, just makes me think like it would have to be like some kind of emergence of that. Like we're like, perhaps the defense is better than could be projected because guys are in the right position, or like there some serious strides made, or Andrew Vaughn is out of left field and Andrew Benintendi makes a bigger difference than you can realize, especially if Oscar Colas is playing most of the games in right. Like you can see some like things falling into place, like Joe Kelly is healthy and a difference maker. Yasmani Grandal is fine. And all these guys who didn't project well are all of a sudden like, being everybody the White Sox thought they were getting when they were signed. Because right now, like the depth isn't like recognized depth, as Dan mentioned, like the beyond the starting 26 is gruesome. And just, when you look at the farm system rankings, like the White Sox rank like bottom 5 more or less in terms of farm depth because they don't have the next ranks coming yet lined up. So it'd have to be like an Orioles like surprise where, hey, all of a sudden these guys, some no names are pretty good, or the pieces fit together specifically to where like bullpens preserve close leads and defense is better at run prevention than anybody thought. And all of a sudden, the Pythag is very much in the White Sox favor in a way that was not foreseen by their previous years of performance.
Well, Jim mentioned the Baltimore Orioles. We're going to take a look at the rest of the American League ZiPS projections after a quick word from our sponsors. Welcome back to the Sox Machine podcast. All right, as we promised, we'll look at the rest of the American League ZiPS projected standings, and looking at the American League East, as Jim mentioned already, the Baltimore Orioles and their projection of 80 and 82. ZiPS has Baltimore in fourth place, one game ahead of the Boston Red Sox at 79 and 83. So 79 and 83, the American League East is going to be in fifth place. The New York Yankees are projected to be 89 and 73 to win the division over the Toronto Blue Jays at 88 and 74 and Tampa Bay at 86 and 76. What this tells me, Jim, in the American League East, that this could be a very tight race all season long. Like Boston at 79 and 83, I think is pretty realistic, but I do think that they'll finish last in the American League East. They're the team that I don't feel great about coming into the season. I think there's a situation that Baltimore could continue to rise and surprise in 2023, but I think ZiPS is, with the Rays, Blue Jays, and Yankees within 3 games of each other, it could be a tight race this year in the East, and that I do buy.
Yeah, that's no surprise there. I think, the Orioles we've talked about, we both thought they were in a position, and I think a lot of people thought they were in a position to really add this winter. Like we both thought independently that the Orioles might be a great landing spot for Carlos Rodon based on just how much room they have in their budget and how they have some holes where like a premium free agent would do a lot of damage. And they've just really done nothing. The Red Sox, basically it seems like every time they patch a hole, another one opens. So like, I'm curious, like as we talk about the White Sox and their win spread over the course of these simulations, I'm really interested in seeing what the Red Sox blob looks like, because I can see a similar thing where things click and the stars do enough damage and all of a sudden they're winning 90 games. And I could see, 1 or 2 key injuries, the bottom falls out and they're winning 60 something because of the way the Red Sox sometimes, just the unique environment there sometimes allows disasters to really blow up in something greater. So that's kind of what I'm thinking with those two teams. They interest me more almost than the top of the division, just because we're used to the Yankees and the Rays going at it year after year. And the Blue Jays, the last couple of years have proven that they're just as sticky as those other teams.
The Yankees have a 76% chance of making the playoffs. The Blue Jays is 72% chance. That's a pretty high percentage to reach the postseason. The Rays are at about 59%. But yeah, the East, according to ZiPS, looks like it's going to be between 3 teams, the Yankees, Blue Jays, and Rays. And, Baltimore and Boston, they both have better than 25% chance of reaching the postseason. So not as dire as, again, when you look at the American League Central and you look at the White Sox, it's a pretty low percentile. And then moving over to the American League West. So ZiPS still buys that Houston is the team to beat, giving Houston a 50% chance of winning the American League West and reaching the postseason at a 78% chance, and projecting a 90 and 72 record for the Astros. Seattle and Los Angeles Angels tie at 85 and 77. And ZiPS slightly likes the Mariners more than the Angels when you are looking at the percentiles, like in the decimal points, like 0.3% or 0.8% difference between the Mariners and Angels when it comes to the wild card and the postseason. So ZiPS is thinking the Angels are the one team that could really disrupt as far as the projected playoff teams. Texas 79 and 83, and then the Oakland A's at 72 and 90. And if you remember our previous episode where we talked about Vegas over under win total, the A's win total right now to the sports books is 60 and a half wins. So if ZiPS is right, the A's are going to crush their win total. I don't know if you want to put money on it. I would consider that a pretty risky bet because I can't name like half of the Oakland roster right now. But Zips, for some reason, thinks that the A's they could finish 72-90 this upcoming year. And as I mentioned, when you look at the projected playoffs, I'm putting Seattle as the 6th seed because they are just slightly ahead of the Angels when it comes to the percentile. But if you want to argue with me and say the Angels and Mariners would tie with this projected, I have no problem doing that. But the division winners and the wild card teams match up to what Vegas thought when we talked about those projected win totals a couple podcasts ago. The Astros being the 1 seed, the Yankees being the 2 seed, the Guardians being the 3 seed, Blue Jays, Rays, Mariners 4, 5, and 6. So, Jim, when you look at the rest of the American League, we talked about the East, but going back to the American League West, what jumps out at you? Are you someone that would be buying like the Angels to have it a bounce back season?
The Angels and Rangers, I think those projections are fascinating because like just both teams are trying to reverse just recent history. I mean, the Rangers have gone really at it via free agency. The Angels have tried to tweak leadership and both in the front office and managerial ranks while trying to get Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani to the postseason. But they've made some interesting moves. Like I think they've done well to address some of the issues filling out the rest of the lineup and the rest of the rotation. But I mean, like we're still trying to see if like it's an Artie Moreno thing with the Angels. So like, if the Rangers stall out below 500 this year with all the money they've spent, will heads roll there? Like what will the reaction there be? But again, like me being drawn to the bottom of divisions, like how are the A's only 2 wins worse than the White Sox?
Mm-hmm.
Like when you look at their depth chart, like Ramon Laureano, who like we were discussing in trade talks is like a potential great 4th outfielder for the White Sox. He's their best position player.
I know. I again,
like, so I mean, like some of it, like it, that's why I kind of like, the White Sox number seems low, and so I'm just curious, like, are there some extreme things going underneath this to where like, how much are the White Sox dipping into like their, 34th player on the roster and beyond to fill out games, to drag their projections down that low while the A's are 72-90 with, again, Ramon Laureano is their best position player, most projectable position player. I don't quite get that one.
I don't think I could even name the starting rotation for the Oakland A's right now after they traded Cole Irvin.
Paul Blackburn.
Okay.
James Caprillion.
Oh, yeah, they got Caprillion.
Is Cole Irvin? Do they have him?
No, they just traded him.
Oh, right. Okay, I think I'm out.
Yeah, we're struggling here. We're struggling. Yeah. Yet that team is their 50th percentile projection is just 2 games behind the White Sox. That's the one that I'm not buying.
So Ken Waldichuk, recent trade. Right now their top 5 starters by projected wins above replacement. Caprillion isn't one of them. Shintaro Fujinami, Paul Blackburn, Ken Waldichuk, Kyle Muller, and Drew Roksinski. Yeah, none of those guys individually are worth even 2 wins above replacement.
Yeah, so I don't buy the Oakland A Zips projection. I think Zips is a bit crazy there. And again, don't attack Dan Zaborski. It's the computer simulation. It's the computer program. It's been running for a very, very long time. And Dan just presses in the code, runs it, and then he reports back at what Zips has to say as far as projections. Maybe Oakland does surprise in 2023 and they could win 72 games and the White Sox severely disappoint and they only win 74 games in the 2023 season. But I think my takeaway here is that Zips, I don't want to say it's a gut punch, but it is a slap upside the head of a reminder that a lot of things can go wrong in 2023 for the Chicago White Sox. And if they go wrong, this is how ugly it can get for them. They could be a team that finishes 14 games below 500.
Yeah, I think specifically if they go wrong the way they've gone wrong. Mm-hmm. Because when you look at projections or like track records, like it kind of bakes that in. Maybe not the specifics, of the way Eloy Jimenez hurt himself on the outfield wall, or the way the White Sox had trouble running down the first base line. Like, it doesn't necessarily have those logged in to be like, what's the chances of, those things happening again? But we kept thinking like, why the White Sox keep hurting themselves in these very normal ways, and they just kept hurting themselves. So yeah, it's a case where like you'd like to think that some of the really extreme stuff will stop, and maybe it will. But the White Sox don't exactly deserve the benefit of the doubt. And I think Zips, being non-sentient, is not going to, has no benefit of the doubt to give.
Yeah. Maybe this is a team that could win as little as 74 games, Jim, and maybe they could win as many as 88 games. Like this 14-game window here for the Chicago White Sox going to the 2023 season. I could buy that. Not the 62 and 100 idea. That would be like the 1 percentile of Zips projections for the upcoming season for the White Sox. But maybe the win range is closer to being 74 to 88 for the White Sox in 2023. When they're closer to 88, they got a real good chance of winning the Central based on the early projections. If they win 74 games, they got a really good chance of having a top 10 pick in the 2024 Major League Baseball draft. That will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. The next set of projections that are going to be released are going to be coming from Baseball Prospectus with Pacoda. We'll talk about those. We'll also talk about the new fielding stats that Baseball Prospectus has released in a future episode of the Sox Machine podcast. Some interesting things have been developed with these new stats that Baseball Prospectus has released. I think some of them, and Jim, I look forward to you writing about them, confirm some of your suspicions about specific players like Tim Anderson's range and what he's able to do in the field and what he's not able to do, and just how good defensively Yoán Moncada has been at third base for the Chicago White Sox in recent years. So that's something to look forward to. Is again, we'll have pitchers and catchers report next week for spring training, and the World Baseball Classic gets started. So more preview stuff coming up, but let's see where Pacoda has the White Sox. Maybe that's going to be another gut punch. But so far, Zips is a pretty cold water dumped on our heads with their 2023 projections, and we are rooting for the White Sox to crush those this upcoming season. But if you just discovered the Sox Machine podcast, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. You can follow us on Twitter. We're at Sox Machine. And you can watch the podcast on youtube.com/Sox Machine. Thank you to all those that have subscribed to our YouTube channel, as we have over 1,000 subscribers. And we also put up video highlights of the podcast when we got them on specific topics that are about 1.5 to 3 minutes. And we'll be turning out more and more video content during the 2023 season. So if you haven't yet, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. If you enjoy our work and want more, you can help support us at patreon.com/Sox Machine, where our Patreon supporters get exclusive content. And that is important because, Jim, it is Prospect Week. So what kind of exclusive content could Sox Machine Patreon supporters expect to see during Prospect Week?
Well, right now I'm wending my way through various categories of White Sox prospects, and through the Patreon request line, I've opened up a thread. Just, send me the prospects you want me to hit on. That's where we touch upon, not hit on. That'd be weird. It's a whole different other thing. As I'm going through this, make sure I mention, or if there are specific concerns or, just aspects of a prospect you're wondering about and want to know my thoughts about, let me know and I'll work them into my write-ups. And if I can't quite fit them in that way, I can maybe do a P.O. Sox exclusive mailbag afterwards. But at the end of Prospect Week, regardless, will be my top 10 White Sox prospect list, which is always exclusive to people who are supporters of Sox Machine on Patreon. So yes, sign up to support us at patreon.com/Sox Machine, and you will get my top 10 White Sox prospect list at the end of this week before we record the next podcast.
And next week will be the kickoff of our 2023 Major League Baseball draft coverage, as it'll be college baseball opening day. And during the college baseball season and the prep season as well, I'll be producing exclusive content of the weekly roundup as far as the big performances and the scouting reports of the top draft prospects as they march along their seasons. And that is also exclusive content on patreon.com/SoxMachine. So a lot of exclusive content coming away to our Patreon supporters. Monthly plans start at $2, or you can save with an annual subscription. Again, you can sign up at patreon.com/SoxMachine. The Sox Machine Podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com, your home for all things Chicago White Sox baseball, and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.